It began like a shockwave through the global markets. In what seemed like a stable moment for world finance, President Donald Trump made a demand that no one saw coming, a demand worth $900 billion. The order went out to two of America's closest allies, Japan and South Korea. Washington called it a necessary contribution to help rebalance the global system. But to the rest of the world, it felt like an earthquake, a move that could redraw the map of international trust. According to Reuters, Japan's finance ministry calculated that meeting Washington's demand would require selling almost half of its foreign exchange reserves, an unprecedented financial sacrifice. In Seoul, South Korea's national security officials warned that complying could consume more than 80% of South Korea's reserves, effectively pushing the economy to the edge of insolvency. Trump supporters argued that the U.S. was finally asking allies to pay their fair share, but critics feared something deeper, that America's strength was beginning to turn inward, shaking the very foundations of its own power.
To understand the weight of this decision, we have to look at the balance Trump wanted to change. For decades, Japan and South Korea have been among the United States' most reliable economic and security partners. Together, they hold more than $2.3 trillion in foreign reserves, much of it invested in U.S. Treasury bonds, which help finance Washington's debt. But under Trump's 2025 trade agenda, those reserves became leverage. The message was clear: if you benefit from American protection, you must also fund America's power. Reuters reported that Japan alone was told to provide around $550 billion, while South Korea faced a $350 billion demand. In Tokyo, the reaction was immediate. Bond yields surged, signaling that even the rumor of a mass sale of U.S. treasuries could destabilize both economies. In Seoul, financial analysts warned that using 83% of the country's reserves would mean economic self-destruction. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, later published internal estimates showing that if 10 to 15% of global reserves were shifted away from U.S. treasuries, American borrowing costs could rise 50 to 75 basis points, equal to tens of billions of dollars in additional annual interest payments. Trump's plan was meant to bring capital home, but in reality, it risked triggering a chain reaction that could make America's own debt more expensive and its leadership more fragile.
While Washington was turning up the pressure on its allies, Beijing was playing a very different game. As reported by Bloomberg, China quietly reduced its holdings of U.S. treasuries to the lowest level since 2008, even as it opened new doors for global investors. The People's Bank of China expanded currency swap lines with central banks across Asia, allowing them to access yuan liquidity in times of dollar stress. At the same time, foreign inflows into Chinese bonds reached record highs in early 2025, supported by yields near 5%, far higher than comparable U.S. treasuries. Investors from London, Singapore, and Hong Kong began buying Chinese government bonds in record numbers, not out of ideology, but because the returns were simply better. Confidence was quietly shifting. Beijing didn't need to challenge the dollar head-on. It only needed to look stable while Washington looked unpredictable. And that's exactly what happened. By the second quarter of 2025, Bloomberg data showed billions flowing into Chinese assets, even as the U.S. faced rising refinancing costs and a weakening dollar. Trump's economic pressure campaign, meant to strengthen America, was, intentional or not, strengthening Beijing's financial position.
Here lies the paradox. The United States was demanding money from partners whose stability helps sustain America's own economy. Japan and South Korea are not just allies, they are also two of the largest holders of U.S. debt. If they sell those treasuries to raise cash, it pushes U.S. bond yields higher, making it more expensive for Washington to borrow. According to Reuters, internal Treasury memos warned of a potential $300 billion funding gap if Tokyo and Seoul refused to comply. Markets reacted almost instantly, U.S. bond yields climbed, the dollar came under pressure, and investors began seeking safety in other assets, including gold and the Chinese yuan. For American households, the consequences are not abstract. Higher bond yields mean higher mortgage rates, higher credit card interest, and greater strain on small businesses. In short, the cost of Trump's hardline strategy was being passed directly to the American people.
Meanwhile, in Beijing, policymakers were reinforcing an entirely different narrative. China was presenting itself as a predictable partner, expanding yuan trade networks across ASEAN, and creating an image of calm amid Washington's turbulence. It was a textbook case of economic contrast. While one superpower demanded, the other invited. While one threatened instability, the other sold security.
Across the Pacific, the political shockwaves were immediate. In Japan, senior lawmakers warned that meeting Washington's demand would undermine national sovereignty. In South Korea, public debate erupted over whether it was fair to risk domestic stability just to finance Washington's deficits. The Japan Times and Yonhap News reported that this was the sharpest strain in U.S.-Asia relations since the Cold War. Behind closed doors, officials worried not just about money, but about the precedent. If the U.S. could demand billions today, what would stop it from doing so again tomorrow? Security experts warn that weakening allies economically also weakens America's own defensive posture in Asia. A financially strained Japan or South Korea means less regional resilience and more opportunity for China to expand influence through trade, credit, and investment. While Trump spoke of strengthening American power, Beijing was quietly filling the vacuum. The message to smaller nations was clear. China builds partnerships, the U.S. sends bills. And in a world where trust is currency, that message carries enormous weight.
By the end of 2025, the effects of Trump's $900 billion ultimatum were impossible to ignore. Bond yields were higher, the dollar was weaker, and China's yuan had become more attractive to global investors than ever before. For Washington, this was meant to be a show of strength, a demonstration that America could dictate the terms of global finance. But as Reuters and Bloomberg both observed, it also revealed something deeper, that U.S. dominance now relies on cooperation it can no longer take for granted. In Tokyo and Seoul, resentment lingers. In Beijing, confidence grows. And for ordinary Americans, the result is felt in higher loan costs, rising prices, and a sense that global power is shifting, slowly but unmistakably, away from Washington. Every superpower eventually faces a moment when its strength becomes its burden. For the United States, that moment may be now. Because in the end, power is not just about how much money a country can demand, but how much trust the world is still willing to give.
The tariff roller coaster continues. Just a day after saying that he was open to being flexible on new tariffs, well, today the president says no more extensions on tariff deadlines. August 1st is the final date.
The tariff clock is ticking, and once again, Donald Trump is at the center of it all. On August 1st, a new wave of tariffs will hit. This time, it's not China or Europe in the crosshairs, but America's closest allies, Japan and South Korea. President Trump has ordered a 25% tariff on all goods imported from both countries, reviving threats he first made in early April. The announcement, posted on his Truth Social account, comes with a clear warning: any retaliation will be met with even higher tariffs. But behind this move is something far more calculated. This isn't just about trade, it's about leverage.
I would say firm, but not 100% firm. If they call up and they say, would like to do something a different way, we're going to be open to that. But essentially, that's the way it is right now, yeah.
Trump's message is simple but forceful. The letters sent to Tokyo and Seoul signal a shift from negotiation to confrontation. Both countries are being told in plain terms, if you want exemptions, increase your imports of American goods, especially agricultural products, and ramp up your domestic production in the U.S. The most contentious point? Cars. For Japan, automotive and parts make up nearly 30% of total exports to the U.S., according to 2024 trade data from Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Trump's team has made it clear the 25% auto tariff is non-negotiable. Japanese officials were shocked by the rigidity of the stance, especially after multiple visits to Washington. Trade envoy Akazawa has flown to D.C. 7 times since April. Even a personal Oval Office meeting with Trump didn't move the needle. South Korea faces similar pressure. While Hyundai and Kia have significant U.S. production, the new blanket tariffs will impact a wide range of smaller volume imports. Both governments are scrambling to respond, but face domestic limits. Japan, for instance, is holding a crucial upper house election on July 20th. Prime Minister Shiba is constrained politically, especially when it comes to concessions on sensitive sectors like rice imports. The deadline of August 1st hangs in the air. It's not just a trade decision, it's a test of resolve. And it puts Japan and South Korea in a difficult spot, forced to choose between economic strain or political compromise. But while U.S. allies face mounting pressure, a different kind of calculation is unfolding in Beijing. China is watching everything, carefully, strategically. For now, the Chinese government is avoiding loud reactions, but its posture is deliberate. By portraying itself as a more stable, more predictable trade partner, China is using Trump's tariff campaign to highlight the unpredictability of U.S. leadership. Behind the scenes, Chinese officials are advancing their own goals. They've tightened export controls on rare earths and strategic materials. They've ramped up outreach to Southeast Asia, especially Vietnam, signaling a pivot to alternative trade corridors. And crucially, China is keeping its powder dry until August 12th, the expiration date of its own 90-day trade truce with the U.S. If no deal is reached by then, retaliatory action could follow. But for now, Beijing is content to let Washington clash with its allies, reserving its leverage for a bigger play. So what does this all mean? It means Donald Trump is reshaping global trade, not just with rivals, but with partners too. It means allies like Japan and South Korea are no longer safe from the economic weapons the U.S. once aimed only at adversaries. And it means China, often the target of Trump's tariffs, may now find itself in a stronger position, not by confrontation, but by patience. As August 1st approaches, and with August 12th just behind it, two key deadlines now define the direction of the global economy. And the world is left watching, waiting to see who makes the next move.
The Chinese electric vehicle maker Xiaomi has stunned markets by selling nearly 300,000 of its sports utility vehicles within an hour of launch. The strong showing sent the Beijing-based company shares soaring to an all-time high.
In a world increasingly powered by electric vehicles, the most important war today isn't being fought with weapons, but with raw materials. At the heart of that war stands one man, Donald Trump. The President of the United States, now deep into his second term, has launched yet another high-stakes offensive. His latest target, Chinese graphite, an essential component in EV batteries. On July 18th, the U.S. Commerce Department announced a sweeping 93.5% anti-dumping tariff on Chinese graphite imports. When combined with existing trade measures, the total cost imposed on Chinese graphite could soar to a staggering 160%. Trump's message was unmistakable. The U.S. will no longer tolerate dependency on Chinese cheap, state-subsidized battery materials. In his view, this was about national security, economic sovereignty, reclaiming control of the EV supply chain. But behind the bold move lies a web of consequences.
The tariff was designed to hit China where it hurts, and it did spark immediate reactions. Shares of U.S. producers like Westwater Resources surged. POSCO Future M of South Korea rose 21% overnight. Canadian firms rallied. From Alabama to Quebec, there was a new wave of optimism among domestic graphite suppliers. But that optimism masks a deeper vulnerability. The U.S. currently imports around 180,000 tons of graphite annually. Nearly two-thirds of it comes from China. According to Bloomberg and the International Energy Agency, no domestic producer today can supply graphite at the required purity, 99.9% carbon, for EV batteries. Tesla and Panasonic warned that shifting supply will take years. In fact, Tesla testified that no U.S. company can currently meet their standards. Even Novonix, a leading U.S. producer, admitted that it will take significant time and investment to qualify material for battery use. Tariffs, while protective, won't solve that gap overnight. So while Trump fires economic shots, American EV makers are caught in the crossfire, forced to pay higher prices or slow production altogether.
Priority to expand into diversified international markets. We extensively participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, which focuses on emerging markets.
And China? It didn't just stand still. Since April 4th, China has restricted exports on 7 critical rare earth elements, materials vital to U.S. defense and clean tech industries. Then came the warning shot. Export controls on neodymium magnets, crucial for EV motors, followed by restrictions on lithium-ion batteries, syringes, and industrial goods. Tariffs as high as 245% are now being imposed on goods flowing both ways. But retaliation wasn't the only play. China pivoted. President Xi has called for Asian unity against unilateralism and protectionism. At the same time, Chinese EV manufacturers began redirecting their vast oversupply toward emerging markets: Indonesia, the Middle East, Kazakhstan. BYD, Xiaomi, and other brands are flooding these regions with low-cost EVs, while many American car makers struggle with rising production costs. This isn't just economic defense, it's an economic offense.
Trump is betting big. He believes tariffs can reshape the entire global EV supply chain. He's slashing federal support for EVs, including the $7,500 tax credit, and investigating national security risks tied to imported minerals. The goal? Force industry back onto U.S. soil. But here's the paradox. While Trump talks resilience, the U.S. remains reliant on the very materials he's taxing. Domestic capacity can't fill the void fast enough. Supply chain costs are rising. And China, far from collapsing, is expanding its reach, quietly building dominance in markets the U.S. is losing. This is not just about graphite. It's a test of economic power, political will, and global influence.
Trump has fired the next shot in a trade war that shows no signs of ending. But every tariff is a double-edged sword. The question now is not just whether China will blink, but whether the U.S. can withstand the pressure of its own policies. The battle for the future of EVs is here, and it's being fought one tariff at a time.